introduce the first speaker, Mr. Benjamin Gerber. He is the President and the Chief Executive Officer of Emirates. Under his leadership, Emirates developed and successfully implemented and an industry-leading environmental attribute registry. Initially, this allowed Emirates to increase its footprint from 50 states and Manitoba to all North America. Emirates is the leading renewable energy tracking and trading system in North America. Now, please welcome Mr. Benjamin Gerber to give his speech on a path to supporting data-driven renewable energy markets. Mr. Gerber, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today with you all. For some of you, it's tomorrow. I'm still on Monday time, but I'm honored to be here with you, and hopefully you can see the looks like you're seeing the right slide. The title of my presentation really has to do with the importance that we're starting to see of incorporating greater amounts of granular energy data into the renewable energy certificate markets. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what Emirates has done, who we are, and then some ideas on where we can go from here, and how these types of the integration of more data can help support a multinational approach to renewable energy certificate tracking. Emirates is a little bit unique in North America. We are an independent nonprofit that also owns and operates its own technology. We've seen a substantial amount of growth. So I like to use the start of unfortunately of COVID as to illustrate the type of growth that we've gone. In March 2020, Emirates had 4 employees and then 3 full-time contract software developers. And we just onboarded our 13th and 14th employees this morning for us. So we've seen a substantial amount of growth. Most of that has come in the form of software developers. So we've really been leaning into the idea of Emirates not just being a nonprofit registry administrator, but a data and software development firm as well. Emirates is a mission-driven environmental attribute tracking system, and we host on our platform both renewable energy certificates as well as renewable thermal certificates. And the bulk of the renewable thermal certificate markets are tracking biomethane. And one of the things that the renewable thermal certificate market allowed us to do is start exploring how we could also track carbon intensity among our existing environmental attributes. So building out the renewable natural gas, as it's called in North America, although most of the world knows it as biomethane, we've been able to integrate more data and documentation into our existing certificate market, and that learning has allowed us to apply that into our REC market as well. We do track in all states and Canadian provinces. I know that a theme of this is cross-national building of environmental markets, but also in a way for multinational organizations to leverage their learnings into the future of these systems. We have, since the launch of our system in 2008, had a board member from the province of Manitoba. So while we're based in the United States, we've had that cross-national collaboration, and we've continued to do that. And we track. We have generators that are located in Prince Edward Island, which is a province of Canada, in British Columbia, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia as well. So we're continuing to see quite a bit of development in those markets. So one of the things that I think is important to recognize among our industry, and I hope this is understood in a way not to cause offense, but RECs and GOs have really become an unnecessary pain point. We've done a lot of stakeholder outreach. I'll talk a little bit about the work that we've done with Google, and we recently added a new board member to MRETS to represent large industrial or large energy users from Facebook on the Facebook Energy team. But what we heard is that that REC tracking systems have been a pain point. And one of the things I like to highlight is in a conversation we had with a household technology name, and it's not Google or Facebook, actually said that they spend 1 month every year aggregating all of their renewable energy certificate geo data, pulling it from all their different systems, pulling all of their usage from their various their loads across the world. And the fact that that takes them a month says that there's a problem. And so something that I think is really important to emphasize out of these multinational these times where we can get together as multiple different countries is the need for data standardization. And along with that is not just data standardization, but process standardization. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how integrating more granular data like locational marginal emissions will actually require a lot of working together across the various countries, jurisdictions, and tracking systems. But one of the things that we're seeing is, and I'll use the United States where it's mostly my experience, although we've done a lot of discussions across the world, is that these systems really evolved to help facilitate compliance markets. However, there's become a growing demand on the voluntary market. And actually, MRETS, when I joined in 2015, less than 30% of our volume was voluntary, and now it's over 65% of these of our transaction volume goes to the voluntary market. So with that, we believe that it's really important that the REC and GEO systems need to evolve in terms of the data they offer, the connectivity into the market. So, for example, MRETS offers a comprehensive API, so an automatic application programming interface. It's the way that software systems talk to each other, and our users for free can do everything in our front end in an automated way with their own software development. So they don't need to use our front end or our user interface if they don't want to. And with that, with the ability to automate a lot of the functionality is going to become more and more important for systems like ours to have standardization so that the type of data we're providing our users who operate in multiple different countries have the ability to more easily access and automate that data into their own systems so that they can manage their REC portfolios. One of the things that we did it was actually on March 1st of 2021 was announced the first ever hourly renewable energy certificate claim. We did that in collaboration with Google. Google put it on the Google Cloud blog. And what we were able to do is actually facilitate that transaction. And our goal now is to integrate more granular data into these markets. And so if you're familiar with Energy Tag, we've worked very closely with them. And we really believe that hourly REC markets are the next logical step in a move from volumetric goals. So for companies to say not only that they're 100% renewable, but that they're able to quantify the benefits they bring to their electricity grid. And so we talk about that in a way that moving away from volumetric goals to carbon-based goals. And in terms of achieving that goal, it's really important that we move from the existing systems, which tend to be focused on monthly issuance, to issuance that allow users to see down into the hourly level and actually make claims. And so while we have the ability to integrate hourly data into our system, we announced that last year. We did this transaction with Google. The next step we believe is actually fractionalization of REC certificates. So being able to both provide data on the hour, but we are going to facilitate by the end of Q2 the ability to make claims down to the watt level by hour in our system, so out to 6 decimal places. And with that, we believe it's not just helping companies like Google or Microsoft meet their 24/7 carbon-free energy goals, but it's also to integrate the grid data into these markets so that we can look at how renewable development and generation brings that carbon data into the equation. So the way that we think of hourly data, and you see this picture of a tiger here, we like to think about it as the difference between an HD TV and a standard definition TV. And this actually, this example comes from Greg Miller, who's a PhD student at the University of California, Davis, and has written some papers on the integration of hourly data into these markets. But we think the focus should be thought of in terms of resolution and not necessarily accuracy. Some people assume that hourly recs are more accurate, and we think that that's an inappropriate way to talk about them, but more about the difference between this HD TV and standard definition TV, because the picture on an HD TV is not more accurate than what you see. What you're seeing here is a picture of a tiger. However, the HD visual provides more resolution, detail, and nuance to the consumer. And again, as we've seen this rise in power purchase agreements, at least in the US, we've seen this demand for greater amounts of data to be integrated into these markets. And there's a lot of exciting things that we can do. And I think it's really important that we work together, whether it's a single country or region of a country or cross jurisdictional transactions. We can send the right market signal. So there is this at least untested assumption that by creating a closer relationship between when energy was produced and when it was actually claimed and moving to that hourly, there will be less reliance on carbon emitting resources on the grid. And there is some data to back that up. However, we need more. So I mentioned that it's not, I don't say that as it's still something in its early phases, but the early data shows that this is something that we can rely on. Also, an important thing is the market signals that are sent. And Greg Miller in his paper Beyond 100% Renewable Policy and Practical Pathways to 24/7 Renewable Energy Procurement, he points out that voluntary procurement does not necessarily coincide with the buyer's demand, so that both the short-term and long-term costs of grid-scale renewable energy generation can result in periods of over and under supply, which create market destabilizing swings in energy markets, at least again in the US. One of the important things that we think is possible with this new level of granular information and data is targeting generation development. So looking at where on the grid can a generation asset have the most efficient, most impact, so reduce the most amount of carbon. And that's where this idea of locational marginal emissions is starting to come into play. The other piece that MRETS is really excited about is how storage markets can evolve to both send accurate price signals to store energy, but also ensure that those storage assets are helping the grid decarbonize. So an example, there has been some studies and early studies in California that showed that in some cases, but not often, that adding more storage to the grid can in some cases increase carbon emissions on the grid. Most people that are looking at storage, well, yes, there is the reliability factor, are looking at it as a way to decarbonize the grid. And so we want to make sure that that's actually happening and be able to measure it. So that hourly data on both matching generation to storage, and then when a storage discharges, Energy Tag is working on processes, and we're involved in that as well. Also, the ability to have decarbonization-based energy efficiency markets and being able to quantify the benefits that not using a megawatt hour can bring to the market is an extra incentive beyond paying customers to shed load when carbon intensity is high on the grid. And then there's another issue that's trending and is obviously renewable hydrogen, and how hydrogen can actually provide benefits, whether it's curtailed renewables so whether it's curtailed renewables or ensuring that increasing the production and consumption of renewable hydrogen isn't necessarily increasing emissions on the grid. So I think with that, I'm excited to have this conversation, and I think what we're working on now as an organization, as a tracking system, is working with groups like the Linux Energy Foundation, which is looking at creating open source standards so that customers are able to access their information in an efficient manner, and that goes back to those data standards, but also the ability to access grid level information, and that's something that we think is important for countries to think about is that access and making sure that you're providing that data. And I'll before I leave, I'll leave one quick example that we think is problematic. In the U.S., one of the grid operators, we have multiple grid operators. One of them, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, they under their approved government tariff, the locational marginal emissions is considered trade secret. However, in the PJM interconnection, which is a neighboring TSO or RTO as they're called, that data point is already available on their public API from their website. And that doesn't really make sense. It's hard to reconcile how it could be trade secret in one part of the country and not in another. And so making sure that as we work across these different jurisdictions, we're ensuring that that data is available and that data is standardized so that if one part of the grid doesn't have a data point, that's acknowledged. And when there's a comparison made between that part of the grid that lacks that data and one part of the grid that does have that data, that it's communicated that there's a difference in the process standard because of that lack of a certain data point. So I want to thank you all. It's rare that I end on time, so I look forward to some questions and discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gerber, to share with us the innovative idea of a data-driven system to give accurate information. Okay, now we have our second speaker, Mr. Hans Kostorff from E2M. He's the founding partner at Energy to Market, E2M, an independent trader founded in 2014, and one of the first market participants in the Mexico wholesale electricity market. E2M supports generators that want to sell their power and qualify users that want to optimize their electricity portfolio. Now, please welcome Mr. Kostorff, who will be speaking to us on operation and analysis of REC market. Mr. Kostorff, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I'm in Mexico, and we do energy trading with all the renewable and non-renewable attributes, all the tracking and tracing for our customers. So allow me, isn't this moving now? I've spent most of my life working for Siemens in Germany and in Latin America, and 1 year in the US. I studied in Colombia economics and the advanced management program at Harvard University in Boston. I'm the founding partner of the energy trader Energy to Market, E2M. We are one of the first energy trading platforms in Mexico that started 6 years ago when the energy market was reformed to allow private participation. And in this context, we set up a structure that allows us to, on one side, bring electricity sources into the market. Our platform allows us integrate even very small generators into the overall marketplace. So we represent cogeneration, on-site solar, we represent power plants, renewable and non-renewable power plants, several cogeneration facility and biogas, biomethane, as Ben was pointing out a moment ago. So we bring those into the market and look for the best way to trade this electricity. We also represent users, large industrial users The limit in Mexico for an industrial user is 1 megawatt. They can participate in the deregulated markets. We have not brought down this limit. And last year, February was a good example where they say that maybe only formal companies should participate in such a new market and households not be exposed to a specialized business that they don't really understand. No, and if you see what happened to household invoicing and electricity invoices in February last year in Texas, then you can see that there is a certain good reasoning to do that. We provide renewable energy certificate services for the generators, as you can see. Analyze the situation with renewable energy generators in Mexico and in other countries. We teamed up with a certifying laboratory that works together with us here in Mexico to do all the certification of the renewable energy. So we serve as a registrants, we issue and manage all the power plants' renewable energy certificates. So far, we have not worked with T-RECs, but we are more than happy to integrate them. We think that there's a great market potential because more and more companies want to make sure that they can certify their electricity. One of the big issues, obviously, in international platforms is to prevent double counting. And we do that together with the platforms. We make sure that the generators are not getting serviced by two different platforms so that the same megawatt hour gets two different certificates. So that is part of our responsibility, be it in Uruguay, Chile, or in Mexico, all the countries in between in Latin America where we are active. We also help our customers to redeem all these certificates, to join them, as was well explained, into an international platform if it's a multinational company that has to get all the information from all the local subsidiaries in all the different countries. We access directly our information and the redemption of those certificates into their existing platforms. So on the one hand side, say, together with the certifying agencies, we make sure there is no double counting. And on the other hand, we tie seamlessly into global international operating companies, Nestle, BMW, whatever, any of those brands that need to register and get their R100 certification. On the other side, we also do all the balancing and the mix for the users so they can see exactly how much renewable energy they generated. And we have a fairly accurate measurement of the CO2 emissions of the alternative energy sources. So we provide them the service of measuring how much CO2 emissions they really evaded thanks to their company policies. At the same time, we work together with our customers on energy efficiency. We still think the most important way of reducing emissions is to consume less electricity. Sometimes people think a trader's only interest is to sell more. This is not our case. We are a highly specialized organization. We can support our customers in reaching energy efficiency goals in their industrial processes, in all their business operations, and then afterwards, on top of it, reduce the emissions through the consumption of renewable energy and certify that process. But we work on both aspects: energy efficiency, reducing the consumption of energy of whatever origin, and then the remaining consumption, switching it to renewable energy. Many of our industrial customers here in Latin America, they require their suppliers to fulfill the same commitments than the purchasing company. Say, you can take a company like Ford. Ford asks its first tier and second tier suppliers to register and to measure exactly how much the renewable energy component is in the products that they deliver, for instance, to Ford, so that the overall company, be it Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Ford, BMW, Mercedes, Nestle, they can aggregate, including all their suppliers. So we think this is quite a good solution, and many companies like the service that we provide in that sense. We also make a distinction between the countries where the energy is generated and consumed. We can do matchmaking regionally, locally, or simply an international matchmaking. So some companies don't really want the certificate to be from exactly the same country where they are producing. They accept certificates from third countries. So we are also supporting those activities. We have also some very important Mexican brands and that have strong national exposure. If you look at Bimbo, the biggest bakery worldwide, there's not another bakery business larger than the Mexican company Bimbo. High percentages of its sales are outside of Mexico. Jose Cuervo, one of the famous tequila brands, sells 82% of its volume outside of the country. Peñoles, a mining company and metallurgical company, also. So we have a series of globally active Mexican companies that want to get support in their activities internationally. And we have multinational companies with important activities in Latin America. Mexico has positioned itself as being one of the largest exporters worldwide. So whatever tendencies to take care of the planet, to go against global warming, to make sure we have less CO2 emissions, is very, very important for Mexico, that is so dependent on over $400 billion of yearly exports. Mexico is, after China, the second largest trading partner of the US and goes basically hand in hand with Canada. Some years Canada is a little bit bigger and sometimes Mexico is a little bit bigger. Mexico on its own exports more to the rest of the world than all of Latin America put together. So that's more or less the dimension. If you add Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, if you add them all up, Mexico alone is a larger exporter. So all these tendencies, all these certification processes that need to comply more and more with their customers, need to comply more and more with final consumers that are asking that the companies they buy products from show and certify that they reduce CO2 emissions. The largest individual part of the exports is automobiles and automotive components. They go basically to Europe and to the United States. And all these automotive companies, basically, I would say all of the ones that are present in Mexico with purchasing, are requiring a time schedule from their suppliers to certify that they are moving towards renewable energy. And the growth rate, now that we have also the logistics issues on the planet because of the COVID restrictions, are also giving another big push to Mexico. We work obviously with different sustainability standards. I think you all know these sustainability standards, the carbon disclosure projects, the electronic product environmental aspects, renewable energy certificates, RE100. That is probably the ones that is most common here in our region in Latin America, and the most widely understood and accepted internationally at the moment. No? Our market here in Mexico, coming back to the double counting, our market here in Mexico clearly has two standards: the just local Mexican standards, clean energy certificates, CELs. The other international renewable energy certificates apply only for the renewable energy that does not get already clean energy certificates from the Mexican regulation. So there is no double counting and no double incentive either for the renewable energy generators. As you can see, we are now at 2022 with 13.9% of consumption by all customers must be reached with renewable power. So we've had already like 20%. Now we bring 14% on top. So we should reach next year or the year after 35% of renewable energy consumption, generation and consumption in Mexico. We have a large group of renewable power plants that do not get credits for clean energy certificates by Mexican law. These are all the plants that were built or permitted before 2014, and they can all apply for other types of RECs. Our energy matrix is in a big part natural gas driven, non-renewable energy. And within the non-renewable energy, the largest portion by far, 67% or 65%, is natural gas. So we have replaced quite a lot of carbon generation, fuel oil generation, diesel generation through natural gas. So that has helped Mexico as a country reduce its emission. I think that is a tendency that we can observe in a similar way also in the United States and Canada, with the fairly widely available natural gas and the fairly low natural gas prices. So we have now 24% renewable energy currently under operation, and a large part of this is obviously also hydroelectric power plants and two small nuclear power plants that barely account for 3.5% of the overall energy mix. We have the 70,000 gigawatt hours that respond to renewable energy and that are a potential market for certifications and for redemption. Here it's getting spring, so I'm already getting a bit of allergies here. Excuse me. So it's not COVID related, my sneezing. So that would be my initial presentation. For any questions, please let me thank again to have us here on this event. It's an honor for me to be able to participate. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kostorff, to give us the opportunity of potential market in Mexico. We will have some question for you in the QA session. Okay, now let me introduce our third speaker. Our third speaker is Mr. Mark Williamson. He's the Executive General Manager of the Clean Energy Regulator, (CR), which is an Australian independent statutory authority responsible for administering legislation to reduce carbon emissions and increase the use of clean energy. He reports to Chair Chief Executive of the Clean Energy Regulator. In his 10 years at the regulator, Mark has successfully led many major initiatives, including the regulator's role in Australia meeting its renewable energy target. Today, the topic he's going to share is Australia's renewable energy certificates market. Mr. Williamson, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Australia's renewable energy certificate legislation and market has been operating since 2001. And in this brief presentation, I will explain a little bit about how that works, but also it's a domestic scheme currently. I'll also explain how we're taking what we've learnt from operating that scheme to develop an international arrangement, a world-class guarantee of origin scheme, as demand for our renewable energy in Australia to be exported occurs both through offshore cables and as clean hydrogen, clean ammonia, clean aluminium and clean steel. So I'll cover a little bit briefly about us. Secondly, about the renewable energy certificate market and the evidence that it's leading to world per capita pace in terms of renewables. A bit about how the scheme works, and then how we're taking what we're learning for that for an international export-based guarantee of origin scheme. So first, a little bit about Australia. A lot of people are surprised we have the same land mass as the US, but 1/13 of the population. So we have a very low population density, and we have world-class wind and solar resources that are moving at a very fast pace. So we are currently averaging about 32% renewable energy, and we do have an aging coal fleet with retirements being brought forward. So a little bit about us. We're an Australian government economic regulator with an environmental objective, and our purpose is to accelerate carbon abatement for Australia. But we think we can also assist the world with our clean exports embodied with our renewable energy. These are the current schemes and new initiatives, but in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the renewable energy target and then how what we've learned from that to build a guarantee of origin scheme. So the next part, I'll cover the evidence about the pace in Australia. So to frame and explain this slide, you'll see that back in 2015, we only added about 1 gigawatt of renewable energy in total. And we've multiplied that times 6, and we've been averaging 6 gigawatts a year for 4 years. We think that'll be the same this year and continue on into the future. So last year in 2021, we averaged 32% of renewables, but in the last quarter, it was actually 35%. So I think that 34% for this year in 2022 is probably very conservative. I think it'll be higher. And if we continue at 6 gigawatts a year, then we reach 50% renewable energy by 2026. But we think there's a lot of upside opportunity to grow that further as all the transmission and interconnection gets built, and also as we have some mega projects and a lot of interest in producing clean hydrogen and ammonia from renewable energy. So we think that can ramp up. The reason that it's been a bit lumpy from year to year, but averaged the 6, is that the power stations, the wind and solar power stations are getting larger, and we count the capacity at the point of first generation. So it's just a timing thing from year to year on the blue and the green parts, which are the blue, the large-scale wind farms, and the green, the large-scale solar. But the yellow bars you'll see is rooftop solar, where back in 2015 and 2016, we're adding about 750 megawatts a year. And last year, we hit a record at 3.2 gigawatts. Australia is recognised as having the highest penetration of rooftop solar PV. And if we include high density apartments, it's 1 in 4 households have rooftop solar. If we exclude those high density apartments, it's 1 in 3. So quite a spectacular growth. We think that's going to moderate a little bit this year and either stay similar to last year or the added capacity may decline. But rooftop solar is the biggest virtual power station in Australia of any fuel source. So this is an important framing slide about how successful our renewable energy certificate scheme has been. In terms of per capita additions compared to other countries, based on IRENA data between 2017 and 2020, we have led the world slightly in terms of per capita additions. And we hope to be able to, as I say, step that up further with some really big power stations and also with transmission and interconnection being built to make it easier to connect more power stations. So now I'll go a little bit into how the scheme and market works. Firstly, we have 2 different types of RECs. One is large-scale generation certificates for large, particularly wind and solar farms, and small-scale technology certificates, which are primarily for rooftop solar, but also efficient hot water. The demand for those RECs is set by our minister on our recommendation each year, and it's the electricity retailers who have to buy these certificates and to cancel them against their renewable energy target liability. And we do have a renewable energy certificate registry for the creation and the trading. And our current scheme as it is ends at the end of 2030. Now, a little bit of detail I'll give you here. We have automated data exchange with the Australian Energy Market Operator. So we have access to all electricity meter data in Australia for verification purposes. We have a number of other technology tools. But Ben, in his presentation, talked about application program interfaces or APIs. And we're in the process of rebuilding all of our systems, which have been funded by the Australian government to do. And all of those systems will be built with application programming interfaces, so direct business system to business system reporting. So I'll go a little bit more into the large-scale generation certificates. We have a legislated target of 33 terawatt hours in 2020, and that continues on till 2030, that same target. The power stations have to be at least 100 kilowatts, but as well as the big wind and solar farms, which are now coming on at gigawatt scale, we do have a lot of very large rooftop systems up to 5 megawatts on shopping centres and schools and all sorts of other facilities. You get a large-scale generation certificate for every net megawatt hours, so that's megawatt hours produced less auxiliary losses. And this year we expect 39 terawatt hours, well above last year was 39 terawatt hours. This year I think it'll be about 44 terawatt hours produced. So the difference is that this scheme, large-scale generation certificates, can be cancelled to prove the use of renewable energy in addition to the statutory 33 terawatt-hour target. So last year we saw almost 6 million LGCs cancelled to prove use of renewables, and that's been growing significantly. And so that growth is turning the flat target into an increasing target and pulling on more large-scale build. We are seeing large-scale investment in large wind and solar power stations. We're seeing the capacity reaching final investment decision trending up, which is great news. The rooftop solar scheme been very successful, small-scale technology certificates. These are solar PV systems less than 100 kilowatts. The average size household system now is almost 9 kilowatts in size and rapidly increasing. So the growth in that capacity is both by more systems being installed, but also much larger systems being installed. It also incentivises solar hot water and air source heat pumps, but that's a relatively small part compared to rooftop solar. All the certificates are awarded to represent the amount of generation or displacement, in the case of hot water, of electricity through to the end of the scheme in 2030. So I'll now briefly cover beyond the current scheme and what we're learning for a Guarantee of Origin scheme. The work being done on this will initially focus on renewable energy and hydrogen and ammonia. And effectively, we need to be able to trace all renewable energy and the certificates being cancelled to produce a metric tonne of clean hydrogen or clean ammonia. And we would be issuing emissions intensity-based certificates. So the unit of production for electricity is the megawatt hour. For clean hydrogen, ammonia, aluminium, steel, we would expect it would be the metric tonne. There is a project, a very bold project, wanting to deliver renewable energy through to Singapore from a power station that would be located in the Northern Territory, which could be around 24 gigawatts capacity. This is a very bold project, but it shows the example that currently we could not issue under the current law large-scale generation certificates for electricity exported, but the proposal is to be able to send, if there is electricity, renewable energy going to countries such as Singapore, it would be Guarantee of Origin certificates for renewable energy, and as I say, Guarantee of Origin certificates for hydrogen, ammonia, aluminium and steel. And I should mention, apart from our world-class wind and solar resources and lots of open space, Australia is the largest miner of both bauxite and iron ore. So we have a great opportunity to export our renewable energy in all sorts of forms. Finally, I'll finish off by briefly mentioning the Australian Carbon Exchange. We have 7 market operators shortlisted. The ones on the screen have self-disclosed. There are 2 additional market operators as well. And we do see the Australian Carbon Exchange helping to facilitate Guarantee of Origin certificates to follow the physical production of renewable energy or other products produced from renewable energy in Australia. So in concluding, our scheme has been very successful, our REC scheme, since 2001. We've learned a lot from that, and we're applying that to a Guarantee of Origin scheme, which would facilitate a world-class assurance of exports, either of renewable energy or containing renewable energy. And the Australian Carbon Exchange will facilitate our growing exports in potentially also the export of Guarantee of Origin certificates. But thank you very much for having me present. We have a wealth of information on our website and look forward to the panel discussion.